There is a moment that changes everything, and it never arrives the way you expect it to. It does not come with thunder or lightning or some dramatic sign written across the sky. It comes quietly, in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, when you are sitting alone in a room that used to feel like home and suddenly realize that everything you have been chasing has left you completely and utterly empty. That is the moment this story begins. Not with a hero, not with someone who had it all together, but with a man who had everything the world promised would make him happy and felt nothing at all inside his chest except a hollow wind blowing through the place where his soul used to be. His name was Daniel. And before we get to where Daniel ended up, you need to understand where he started, because the distance between those two places is what makes this story worth telling. Daniel grew up in a small coastal town called Ravensport, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your business and your grandmother's business too. He was raised in a faith community, baptized as an infant, confirmed as a teenager, and by the time he was 22, he had quietly, almost imperceptibly, walked away from all of it without making a single sound. Not because something terrible happened, not because he was hurt or betrayed or disillusioned by scandal. He walked away for the most dangerous reason of all. He simply got comfortable. He got a good job, then a better one, then an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, then a car that turned heads at traffic lights, then a circle of friends who were always available for the next party, the next trip, the next experience, the next distraction. Life was wide open in front of him, and he walked through it with his arms spread out, grabbing everything he could reach. And for a while, a long while actually, it felt like living. It felt like freedom. It felt like he had figured out something that the people back in Ravensport kneeling in wooden pews on Sunday mornings had completely missed. He told himself he was enlightened. He told himself he had outgrown the narrow thinking of his childhood. He told himself that the wide, open road he was walking was the road of the truly free. What Daniel did not understand, what he could not have understood at 22 or 25 or even 28, is that there is a profound and terrible difference between a road that is wide because it leads somewhere magnificent and a road that is wide because it is leading you slowly, pleasantly, almost imperceptibly, toward a cliff you cannot see yet. He could not see the cliff because the road was so beautiful. The views were stunning. The company was entertaining. The noise was constant, and the noise was the point. Because when the noise stops, when the music cuts out and the laughter fades, and the last guest closes the door behind them, you are left alone with yourself. And for Daniel, being alone with himself had become the most terrifying experience imaginable. Because in the silence he could hear something. A voice. Not loud, not dramatic. More like a frequency you feel in your chest before you can identify it with your ears. A frequency that said simply and persistently, "This is not it. This is not what you were made for. This is not the life that was written for you before you were born." He ignored it for years. He turned the music up. He filled the calendar. He said yes to everything that kept him moving, because movement meant he did not have to sit still long enough to feel the thing he was afraid to feel. And then one night, everything stopped. It was not a dramatic catastrophe. It was not an accident or a diagnosis or a loss, though those things would have been easier to explain to himself. It was simply a Friday evening when his phone stopped ringing and the apartment was quiet, and he sat down on the floor, his back against the couch, and looked at his life spread out around him like the contents of a bag someone had dumped out to examine, and realized with a clarity that was almost physically painful that none of it meant anything. Not one single piece of it. He had the wide gate. He had everything the wide gate promised, and the wide gate had delivered every single item on the list and left him more alone than he had ever been in his life, because the wide gate can carry everything you own, but it cannot carry the one thing you actually need, which is the presence of something greater than yourself walking beside you through the dark. He called his mother that night. He had not called her in 4 months. She answered on the second ring the way mothers always do, as if some part of them is always listening for the sound of their child's voice, no matter how much time has passed. He could not explain what he was feeling. He just said, "Mom, I think I got lost somewhere." And she said, "I know, baby. I have been praying for this phone call for 3 years." She told him about a priest named Father Elias who led a small congregation in the hills outside the city, a man who had himself walked through fire to get to where he was standing. She told Daniel that Father Elias had a habit of saying something that had never left her since the first time she heard it. He said the narrow gate is not narrow because God wants to make your life difficult. It is narrow because it can only fit you. Just you. Not your luggage. Not your past. Not your reputation. Not your ego. Not the version of yourself that you perform for other people. Just the real you, stripped down, honest, and willing. And when you walk through it, you have no choice but to leave everything behind that was never actually yours to carry. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay on his back in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, he did not reach for his phone. He just lay there and let the silence be what it was. And in that silence, something began to shift. Something quiet and tectonic and permanent. He drove to the hills on a Sunday morning 3 weeks later. He sat in the back of Father Elias's small stone church and listened to a man who spoke not like someone performing faith for an audience, but like someone who had paid a real price for every word he was saying. Father Elias told a story that morning that Daniel would carry with him for the rest of his life. He told the story of a priest in a country where faith was illegal, a country where the government had decided that God was the enemy of the state and had set about proving it with prisons and interrogation rooms and decades of systematic cruelty. This priest, whose name was Father Mikhail, had been dragged from his church one winter morning while snow was still falling on the steps outside. He was brought to a facility with no windows and no heat and lined up with other believers while a senior officer walked back and forth in front of them with his hands clasped behind his back and a look of absolute contempt on his face. The officer stopped and turned to them and said, "Your God cannot hear you in here. No one can hear you in here. You are hungry, yes? Pray then. Pray to your Christ and ask him for bread. Go ahead, pray." So they prayed, quietly, sincerely, with the kind of faith that has been refined by suffering into something that looks less like religion and more like breathing. And when nothing appeared, no bread materialized from the air, the officer smiled the smile of a man who believes he has just won an argument. He said, "Now ask me, and I will give you bread immediately. So tell me, which one of us is God?" He began to say things about Jesus that Father Mikhail would not repeat later when he wrote about this day. Things that were designed to humiliate and provoke and break something in the people who loved the name being dragged through the dirt of that cold concrete room. Father Mikhail stood very still. His heart was hammering. He knew exactly what would happen if he opened his mouth. He had seen what happened to the ones who opened their mouths. He was calculating the cost in real time, measuring it against his fear, and the fear was winning. And then he felt an elbow in his ribs. His wife Elena was standing beside him, her jaw set, her eyes burning with something that was not anger, but was close to it, something fiercer than anger, something that looked like holy indignation. She leaned close to his ear and said very quietly, "You have stood at an altar and given people the body and blood of Christ for 20 years. You have told them he is the only way. You have said it 10,000 times. Are you going to stand here now and let this man speak about your Lord like this and say nothing?" Father Mikhail whispered back, "Elena, you know what they will do." She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said, "I would rather be the widow of a brave man than the wife of a silent one." Something broke open in his chest when she said it. Not the fear. The fear was still there. But something larger than the fear cracked through it like light through a fractured wall. He stepped forward. He opened his mouth. He spoke. What followed was 15 years that Father Mikhail later described as the worst and the best years of his life simultaneously. 15 years of a prison that was designed to destroy faith and instead refined it into something unbreakable. 15 years during which he said he felt the presence of Christ so close, so constant, so undeniable that there were moments he forgot where he was. 15 years until word reached the outside world and a group of believers raised enough money and enough political pressure to secure his release. He was put on a plane with Elena and flown to a country where he could worship freely, speak freely, live without the weight of a government's hatred pressing down on every breath. He had everything he had prayed for during those 15 years, and he wrote a book about it. And in the book, he wrote one sentence that Father Elias read aloud to his congregation on that Sunday morning, a sentence that landed in Daniel's chest like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples out to every edge. Father Mikhail wrote, "I thought I would find my Lord in freedom. I did not know until I lost the chains that I had only ever truly found him inside them." Daniel sat in that wooden pew and felt something he had not felt in years. He felt the weight of everything he had been carrying suddenly become visible to him. All of it. The luggage of a decade spent walking through the widest gate he could find, dragging behind him the dead weight of a life that looked full and was not. And he understood for the first time in his adult life that the narrowness of the narrow gate is not a punishment. It is a mercy, because the narrow gate will not let your baggage through. It will not let the performance through. It will not let the version of you that you built to impress people through. It only fits the real you, the broken, honest, searching, desperate, and therefore finally ready you. He walked out of that church into the pale winter sunlight and stood on the stone steps for a long time. A young man came out behind him, maybe 19, with the look of someone who had also wandered in for the first time and was not entirely sure what had just happened to him. They stood there together in silence for a moment, and then Daniel said, "First time?" The young man nodded. Daniel said, "Me too." In a way. The young man said, "Does it get easier?" Daniel thought about Father Mikhail in a windowless room in a country that wanted him erased, feeling the presence of God so close he forgot where he was. He said, "I think it gets realer, and I think real is better than easy. There are two gates in front of every single one of us every single day. One is wide and comfortable and crowded, and it will take everything you own and everyone you know and all the noise you have learned to use to drown out the voice you are afraid to listen to. The other is narrow. It is uncomfortable. It is sometimes lonely. It asks you to put down everything that was never truly yours to carry. But the one who waits on the other side of it is the only one who has ever known your name completely, known your worst moments and your most hidden fears, and loved you without condition or limit or end. The question is not whether you believe that. The question is whether you are willing to put down the luggage long enough to find out. If this story reached something in you today, do not scroll past that feeling. Leave a comment below and tell me where you are in your journey. Share this with someone who is standing at a crossroads right now and does not know which gate to walk through. Subscribe if you want more stories that ask the questions worth asking. And remember the words of a man who found God in a prison and lost him in a palace. The narrow gate is not the end of your freedom. It is the beginning of the only freedom that was ever real.